I view one of the big myths of the crisis as that it was purely the effect of free markets. This is what happens when you have free markets.
One of a president's most important appointments is chairman of the Federal Reserve. The Fed is the symbol of the integrity of our financial system.
The Fed kept interest rates too low for too long.
All of that led to, as you know, a big boom and a big bust.
You have what degree of confidence in your ability to control this?
100%.
How can the dollar be anything except the world's greatest monetary brand, the Coca-Cola of money? How could it be anything else but? Well, you just watch.
Hi, I'm Zach Weissmueller with Reason TV. We're here with Jim Bruce. He is the filmmaker behind the new documentary, Money for Nothing, Inside the Federal Reserve, which is now being screened in select theaters and available on DVD and for digital download at moneyfornothingthemovie.org. You run through the history of the Federal Reserve a little bit at the beginning of the movie, and what struck me was that every Fed chairman kind of thinks that he's figured it out. He's figured out the formula. In the Depression, they were too tight, and it caused it to get worse. In the 70s, it was too loose. Volcker came in then and tightened it up, and then Greenspan was like inflating and deflating bubbles like crazy. Do you think that they are learning from history and they're getting better, or is that just kind of an intellectual conceit and hubris?
If you look at the Fed, they have learned throughout history, but often only after causing these massive problems like the Great Depression. One of our points in the film is that the Fed might not have learned the lesson of, for example, the 2008 crisis, which to some observers is that cheap money and cheap credit and a central bank kind of encouraging and pushing people to take risk, in different areas of the market, is actually something that's going to hurt our economy, make it less efficient in the long run.
But the Federal Reserve's story is that we were on the brink of a financial meltdown and that they saved the day, and they had to act in the way that they acted. Do you buy that?
Yeah, we try to credit the Fed in the beginning of the film with the fact that they did, in my opinion, and certainly in their opinion, prevent a total collapse of the financial system in 2008 and early 2009. I think the Fed was really the only institution capable of doing that because they had the ability to create as much money as they wanted. They weren't constrained in the way Congress might have been. But you could argue that what they've done since then is pump lots and lots of money back into this bloated, sort of dysfunctional, inefficient financial system at a time when the market was really trying to shrink the financial system.
You could argue that they saved the financial system, but you could also argue, and I think you do argue, that they pushed us to the brink of the collapse of the financial system. And a lot of that blame in your movie seems to rest on a man named Alan Greenspan.
Yep.
And I'm interested in talking about him because libertarians have a very contentious relationship with Greenspan because he was supposedly an Ayn Rand acolyte, yet he was kind of the ultimate central planner. You portray him in the movie as this guy, this kind of like mad genius, pulling levers and pushing buttons and tweaking the economy just so until it just kind of rolls out of control. How does that happen? How do we get an Alan Greenspan who says that he believes one thing, but then becomes kind of the antithesis of what he says?
That's, to me, as a filmmaker, Greenspan's such a fascinating character because he's a living contradiction, right? He was not a laissez-faire Fed chairman. He was a guy who believed in intervening at all these different points. I view one of the big myths of the crisis as that it was purely the effect of free markets. This is what happens when you have free markets. They do these crazy things. The Fed is really arguably the most important influence on the stock market. They're printing $500 billion a year to buy mortgages and $500 billion a year to buy government debt.
I want to talk about the stock market for a second because you point out that there's this kind of pernicious myth. If the stock market's good, the economy is good. And that may not be true. It's something we hear all the time from Fed chairmen. President Obama is always bragging about how well the Dow is doing.
I really think it started with Greenspan, but Bernanke has taken it even to a new level in terms of being very explicit about the Fed's role in supporting or propping up the stock market and touting the benefits of that. And Bernanke in interviews has actually mistakenly answered, someone asked him, how has QE helped the economy? And his answer was, well, the S&P 500 is up 20% and the Russell 2000 is up 30%. So he's literally, if someone's asking how's the economy doing, he's talking about the stock market.
But people believe that, though. They feel good when the stock market's doing well. They're making money if their money's in the stock market. Why isn't it accurate to say that?
I mean, I think, socially, somehow we have gotten to this point of view. You hear about it on the radio, you see about it on TV. I think the average American has a sense that somehow if the stock market's up, it's going to help them out. But what we point out in the film is that it's really only the wealthiest Americans who own a huge portion of the stock market. It's easier to get the stock market to go up by having really cheap money and having Ben Bernanke go out and say, I want the stock market to go up with my policies, which he's been doing, than it is to generate actual economic growth. To me, it's a big question in the film. Is this what we want this incredibly powerful institution to do in our name, to prop up the stock and housing markets? Or do we want them to allow our economy to develop in a more healthy and sustainable way?
There's a long shot in your movie of a Ron Paul rally where a bunch of people are chanting, "End the Fed." Ron Paul's undeniably the person who's brought the Federal Reserve into the consciousness of a new generation.
Yep.
How do you feel about just the idea of ending the Fed? Is it the most prudent thing to do after it's been at the center of screw up after screw up, or is there some way to just fix it?
In the film, we don't go that far, whether you like them or not. The Fed is playing such a huge role in our economy that it's very hard to imagine how you would simply just logistically get rid of the Fed and not sort of totally disable our financial system. What we argue in the film is for something that might be a little more practically achievable. Maybe the Fed should have a single mandate. Maybe we shouldn't ask the Fed to create employment.
It seems like you could say that, well, if the Fed just acted more responsibly, if they acted like they did during the Volcker years or something, then maybe we'd be okay. But how do you stop these ambitious people from getting in there and expanding the mandate?
The leadership at the Fed, Ben Bernanke and I think Janet Yellen, who's going to follow him, they really believe in the Fed's power to create more growth and to try to drive us towards full employment. That's what they think they're doing. But yet, as we point out in the film, there's other officials at the Fed who don't think that's possible and are even giving speeches. Charles Plosser, who's in the film, gave a speech very recently saying he thinks the Fed should have a single mandate.
You mentioned Janet Yellen, who's in your movie. She's going to be our next Fed chair, and she didn't know that at the time that she did the interview, so maybe she was more forthcoming with you. What was your impression talking to her? Is there a reason for optimism, or is she pretty much going to continue in the Bernanke, let's keep interest rates low and keep that printing press running type of model?
I'm concerned that Janet Yellen is going to follow the policies of Ben Bernanke, and so it's going to be just more of the same. So I think she really has all the intentions he wants. I think she wants to help the average person, but I think her idea is that more quantitative easing, a longer period of 0% interest rates is going to do that.
I read an article that said you saw the financial crisis coming and you put your money where your mouth was and you bet against it. You made a bunch of money and you used that money to fund this movie. First of all, is that true? And
Absolutely.
If that is true, what do you see next in your crystal ball?
There were a lot of people warning about the problems in the early to mid 2000s in the housing and financial markets. And so I was reading those people and began investing accordingly, especially in 2007 and 2008. And I did profit from the financial crisis by very aggressively shorting financial stocks. To me, that's the perspective I bring to the film. My concern is that the Fed policies, today are going to backfire just like they did previously, and there isn't the ability for the Fed and the U.S. government to come in and sort of save the day, because the Fed and the U.S. government are both really extended right now. And so one of the reasons I made the film was to really call people's attention to the risk of today's Fed policies, kind of before we have another crisis and are worse off for it.
Well, it's a very interesting and informative film, and I appreciate you coming here to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me.
For Reason TV, I'm Zach Weissmueller.